English, canal numéro 2 pour le français, and 3 Inuktitut. I would like to start by acknowledging that this event is taking place on the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people, and observe that they have taken care of the land on which we find ourselves, just as Indigenous peoples in Arctic and northern regions have done since time immemorial. Before we begin, I would also like to acknowledge that today marks the 35th anniversary of a tragic event, the massacre of the École Polytechnique in Montreal, where 14 young women were murdered. J'aimerais, s'il vous plaît, vous demander d'observer une minute de silence en leur honneur. Merci. Thank you. Aujourd'hui, nous allons entendre l'honorable Mélanie Joly, ministre des Affaires étrangères, qui va nous présenter la nouvelle politique étrangère du Canada pour l'Arctique. Afterwards, we will hear from distinguished guests that contributed to the development of Canada's Arctic foreign policy, including the Honorable Bill Blair, Minister of National Defense, the Honorable Dan Vandal, Minister of Northern Affairs, Natan Obed, President of Inuit Tapirit Kanatami, R.J. Simpson, Premier of the Northwest Territories, Ranj Pillai, Premier of the Yukon, P.J. Agiakok, Premier of Nunavut, and Kluane Adamek, Yukon Regional Chief of the Assembly of First Nations. We are also joined today in person by a number of other distinguished guests and collaborators on the Arctic foreign policy, including George McKenzie, Dene National Chief, Johannes Lamp, President, Nunatsiavut Government, Paul Ornett, Vice President, Nunavut Tungavik Inc., April Martel, Chief, Hatlaudichi, First Nation, Robert Charlie Tetlichi, Chief, Inuvik Native Band, and Lisa Copperqueluk, President, Inuit Circumpolar Council, Canada. A warm welcome and thank you for joining us today in person. Je tiens également à souhaiter la bienvenue aux représentants des ambassades de nos partenaires des États arctiques qui se joignent à nous aujourd'hui, ainsi à ceux qui nous suivent en ligne à travers le pays et dans le monde entier. Before the speeches start, I would like to welcome to the stage Mr. David Sarkoa for a drum dance performance.
Blackjack, David Sarkoa yunga. Ola yunga, nutaka yunga, angayulawa ilangia yok. Okahati bolak mga nukak. Pihi ingmi lauk meo. Nalia, tem na ihuitok, nokkawitok ihuitok. Imngilaw meong tema imngilak para angayum nun tapanu takaw yung aperiya kanaribo nga nukat tong akakpi tong akaktu kina inugakot niyariw siyempre hilulok pa nga Tunga kalasung alunut ako yung awiniling ni kayo ukiwakti yung mahana momang nakto nga inutulong nga imita kang ilunga. Good morning to you all. Inukatika, my fellow Inuit people. I remember my late brother Ilangiyayok back in 50s while living in Anada Lake often asked me, sing me a song. So your song, the one, that never-ending song. That was a requirement of all my age group at age 5 and 6. So I would sing him a song. You sing when your big brother asks you to sing. And not kidding, but he also asked me, do you have a spirit helper called Doma? Yes, I have. And it was my spirit helper. These two things were requirement of my age group and a generation before me, just like my late brother. But myself, my late brother's generation, learned to drum dance, but never capture the art of composing traditional songs. We were in midst of change so fast. We both never learned how to compose traditional way of beat, which involved following and written guidelines for men. So I'd like to demonstrate to you a simple, short performance. Also, I'm very happy to see my old classmate from Fort Smith. Yes, here is Momang Nel Pongaman.
Nakormik, Mr. Sakoa, for your inspiring performance. The Arctic foreign policy is a comprehensive diplomatic strategy for Canada's engagement in and on the Arctic. It is the culmination of months of extensive engagement with territorial and provincial governments in Inuit, First Nations, and Métis. It is also a product of dialogue with like-minded Arctic states and one that Global Affairs Canada has led with pride and purpose. Avec ces quelques mots d'introduction, Madame la Ministre Joly, je vous cède la parole pour nous présenter la nouvelle politique étrangère du Canada pour l'Arctique.
Merci Alexandre. Ça me fait plaisir de vous voir tous réunis aujourd'hui ici. Good morning, everyone. This is a great day, and I'm happy to see all of you here. Of course, I would like to acknowledge the presence of my dear colleagues, the Minister of Defense, Bill Blair, the Minister of Northern Affairs, of course, my dear friend Dan Van Daal, my fantastic Parliamentary Secretary, Rob Oliphant, of course, MP Michael McLeod, also who's joining us, and Senator Duncan and Senator also Anderson. So thank you for being with us. And I would also like to thank the presence, and I'm sorry, bear with me, I know there are lots of people, but the three premiers, so of course, Premier Simpson, Pillai, and Aguacook, so thank you. It's really a pleasure to see you here. President Obed Nathan, from the bottom of my heart, I want to thank you in front of everybody for everything you've done. Also, Regional Chief Adamek, good to see you. President Kopekwaluk, thank you for being here. President Lampe as well. National Chief Mackenzie, thank you. Chief Martel as well. And also Paul Et j'aimerais aussi remercier tous les ambassadeurs qui sont ici parce que ça fait toute la différence, le travail que j'ai pu faire avec vos différents ministres des Affaires étrangères et avec vous également. Donc, le Canada est une nation de l'Arctique, et en raison de notre géographie, bien sûr, mais aussi, surtout, parce que les Inuits en prennent soin depuis des générations. Et pendant toutes ces années, nous avons partagé la gestion de l'Arctique et des régions nordiques avec les peuples autochtones. Et ensemble, aux côtés des autres États de l'Arctique, nous avons maintenu la paix. However, guardrails that prevent conflicts are increasingly under immense strain. Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine has led us all to ask, who's next? It is clear that Russia has no red lines. Its designs on the Arctic and its resources are well known. They're, after all, our neighbor, and we have to take that into account. But what is new is that Russia is increasingly dependent on China because of its war in Ukraine. It is reversing its historic posture by opening its Arctic to China. And this is fulfilling the long-time aim of China, which has declared itself as a near-Arctic state. Russia's military is more aggressive in its incursion into the Arctic. And now China has begun to launch joint operations with Russia. We're seeing more ships in the Arctic, and they're not only doing scientific research. All that is happening while Arctic sea ice is melting. Shorter maritime routes between the Indo-Pacific and Europe are opening. Competitors are seeing new opportunities to exploit natural resources in the Arctic, and what is happening in the Indo-Pacific and in Europe is becoming more than ever connected. The Inuit, First Nations, and Northern communities have been warning us about the changing landscape in the North for some time. Not just the physical changes caused by a rapidly warming climate, but also changes to the geopolitical landscape. Foreign state actors are increasing their activities in the North, and not just on land and sea. We see disinformation and propaganda to undermine our democratic institutions and divide Canadians. We see the targeting of diaspora communities and dissidents, cyber attacks, and espionage. And I can firmly tell you that this is not just a problem that is unique to southern part of Canada. There are northern communities who tell us about being approached by state actors looking to buy land and exert influence in those remote communities. Canada is an Arctic nation, and we are at a critical moment. The Arctic is no longer a low-tension region. We live in a tough world, and we need to be tougher in our response. Decisions made today will shape our future. And that's why today I'm pleased to launch Canada's new Arctic foreign policy. Our Arctic foreign policy has 4 key pillars. The first one is, of course, that we'll continue to assert Canada's sovereignty, including over the Northwest Passage. Diplomacy and defense go hand in hand, and there's a reason why our new defense policy update is called Our North, Strong and Free. And of course, Minister Blair, listening to me very, attentively right now, is actually going to present you more information soon. But what I can tell you about what we're doing in terms of defense is that Canada is bolstering our military presence to protect our Arctic, our continental security alongside the US, and we will make sure to increase our cooperation with our Arctic allies and NATO. We're making key strategic purchases to enhance our military capacity in the region. This new Arctic policy will contribute to put our new assets to good use. Our defense objectives are also met by new international partnerships. At the last Washington NATO summit, Canada announced the Ice Pact alongside the US and Finland. Together, we will ensure we have the icebreakers needed to patrol northern waters. Through this partnership, Canada is positioning itself to lead the world in the production of icebreakers. This will help our allies in the Arctic region. This will create also good, well-paying jobs at home. And let us be frank here, we have a lot of catching up to do when you see the number of icebreakers that Russia is producing. And under this pillar, we'll also share intelligence with Indigenous communities and territorial premiers so they can fully participate in decisions involving their safety and their security. The second pillar is advancing Canada's interests through pragmatic diplomacy. Rising geopolitical competitions means that we need more eyes and ears in the north. We need to even have stronger ties with our Arctic allies, the United States and Nordic countries. The Arctic will be key in our engagement with the US. The US is our closest partner and will continue to be as we invest in Arctic security with the new policy, the Arctic foreign policy, as its foundation. We'll also work closer with our like-minded non-Arctic states, especially in the North Atlantic and also in the North Pacific. Moreover, with Alaska in the west and Greenland in the east, we will open new consulates in Anchorage and Nuuk to be there where it counts. Le troisième pilier traite de notre leadership sur la gouvernance de l'Arctique et quant aux défis multilatéraux. Depuis l'invasion illégale de l'Ukraine, nous avons dû demander des comptes à la Russie. Et à partir de ce moment-là, il n'était plus possible de se réunir comme si de rien n'était. Que ce soit au sein du Conseil de l'Arctique ou au sein de tout autre forum diplomatique. Malgré l'absence d'engagement politique avec la Russie, le Conseil de l'Arctique poursuit son excellent travail en tant que principal forum pour les affaires de l'Arctique. Les participants permanents autochtones du Conseil jouent un rôle clé dans la poursuite de ces activités. Ils sont en effet en contact régulier avec d'autres populations en Arctique et c'est pourquoi nous avons entendu haut et fort l'importance de maintenir le Conseil de l'Arctique bien actif. Sur les 8 pays de l'Arctique, 7 sont désormais membres de l'OTAN. L'article 5 de l'OTAN nous protège donc tous. Le Canada est très fier d'avoir été le premier pays à ratifier l'adhésion de la Finlande et de la Suède à l'OTAN. En septembre dernier, j'ai accueilli pour la première fois à Iqaluit les ministres des Affaires étrangères et des représentants des 5 pays nordiques. On parle ici du Danemark, de la Norvège, de la Suède, de la Finlande et de l'Islande, en plus du Groenland et des îles Faroé. Nous avons discuté de nos préoccupations communes en matière de sécurité et ce type de dialogue a définitivement contribué à l'élaboration de cette nouvelle politique. Je les ai invités à nouveau avec les États-Unis pour une rencontre qui a eu lieu plus tôt cette semaine alors que nous étions tous à Bruxelles en marge de l'OTAN. Et ce n'est que le début. Nous poursuivrons tous les 7 ce dialogue sur les questions de sécurité en Arctique. Our fourth pillar is focused on people and ensuring we have the right voices around the table. Canada will now have an Arctic ambassador. We'll also find new ways to enhance representation of Indigenous peoples on the world stage and advance their priorities with international counterparts. Au cours des derniers mois, j'ai eu la chance d'échanger à plusieurs reprises avec des gens du Nord et des représentants des peuples autochtones. On a beaucoup parlé des enjeux de sécurité qui s'invitent dans leur quotidien. It goes without saying that those living in the North are best placed to know what's going on in the North. They told me about the very real effects of climate change, such as the destructive wildfires that have forced them to leave their homes. We all remember summer of 2023 in Yellowknife. I also heard them rightly reminding me nothing about us without us. And all these conversations have contributed to the policy we are presenting today. It responds to these concerns. It builds on their observations. We wanted to put the people of the North at the heart of our action. And after all, they're a central part of what makes us an Arctic nation. Collectively, these 4 pillars represent a fundamental change in the way we look at the Arctic, because we can no longer only depend on our geography to protect us. Until now, we tended to consider the Arctic from a north-south perspective. We're changing our approach to look at it from other angles. When it comes to protecting and working with the Inuit and all the people in the Arctic, we must deepen north-to-north relationships. In terms of strengthening our diplomacy and protecting our continent, it means looking at the Arctic as the connection between East and West. From NATO territories and our allies on the Atlantic, through NORAD, and to our security partners in the North Pacific. This means working as a team to support Inuit communities and their aspirations. It means working with the territories and key Arctic allies. Today's new Arctic foreign policy represents a shift in how we see Canada's role in a region that is becoming more and more strategic as geopolitical tensions deepen. It was carefully designed with people living it. We now need to put it in action. Our geography is our destiny. Let's meet the challenge. Merci beaucoup. Thank you so much.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Ministre Joly. I would like now to invite over to the stage Minister Blair to provide some remarks.
Well, good morning, everyone. And first of all, let me join Mélanie in acknowledging our many distinguished guests and friends who have joined us here this morning. I think all of us being here together, I hope, speaks very loudly of our unity and our collective resolve to do what is necessary and right for our nation and for the people of the North. Canada's Arctic is a key part of our national identity as Canadians. And while the region's remote location and challenging terrain have kept it protected for many generations, as Mélanie's indicated, that reality is rapidly changing. More navigable shipping lanes and growing access to Arctic resources are enticing nations, sometimes adversarial nations, to the region, and it's creating heightening competition. And this changing environment has created new threats and vulnerabilities, which do necessitate an urgent response to assert Canada's sovereignty in the Arctic and northern regions. But I would suggest to you it's much more than just threats. It's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for us, a remarkable generational opportunity, to engage in nation building, to work closely with all of the people of the North, to advance our reconciliation agenda in this country. It's an opportunity to make historic investments. And I can also share with you, when I first went to the North as Canada's Defence Minister, I was thinking about the work that we had to do there to strengthen our defence capabilities. But it was Northerners who told me, if you want to assert our sovereignty, if you want to ensure Canada's security and defence, it's much more than a military plane flying overhead or a military boat sailing by when the ice is out. And I asked, all right, then what's the right way to do it? And what I heard in response in every place in the Arctic was the same. Invest in infrastructure. Invest in important things like airport runways, highways, deep water ports, power generation, fiber and satellite communications, water treatment, medical treatment. Help us build communities. Help us build prosperity and opportunity in the North. And that's the best way to assert our sovereignty. Now, when we announced our defense policy earlier this year, our North Strong and Free, I spoke about some of the most pressing and important tasks that we face in improving the defense of the Arctic. But the alignment of Canada's defense and foreign policy is absolutely crucial to addressing the challenges that we face. And I also want to acknowledge that using diplomacy to shape the international environment and advance Canada's national security interest has to be the main focus of Canada's efforts, and it certainly is the focus of our new Arctic foreign policy. Our defense work in the region is strengthened and guided by the team at Global Affairs, and we thank you for that leadership. Our defense policy provides the Canadian Armed Forces with some of the tools that they need to reinforce our sovereignty in the region. It's going to invest in multi-use infrastructure that the Canadian Armed Forces members and Rangers need to operate effectively. But at the same time, it's also going to ensure that northern communities have access to that valuable infrastructure. It's going to make a difference. And for example, the expansion of the Inuvik Airport runway at the Zubko Airport is going to better support both military and civilian aircraft. The establishment of northern operational support hubs across the north is going to increase our military responsiveness and the ability to address challenges in remote locations on shorter notice. But it's also going to create opportunity for the people that live in the region. Our $38 billion investment in NORAD modernization is going to continue to improve seamless interoperability with the United States. And it enhances our shared air defense as between our nations as we confront the 21st century threats together, including and most importantly in the North. In addition, the Communications Security Establishment of Canada leads several lines of effort on behalf of the Five Eyes relations in the Arctic. And I want to thank all of those at CSE for their foreign intelligence and cyber security expertise as they bring significant value to both our domestic partners and international allies in defending the Arctic. And collectively, our investments are going to increase the Canadian Armed Forces' ability to monitor and deter threats in the region, to protect our sovereignty, but to work in close collaboration in a respectful and appropriate relationship with all the people of the North. And in particular, we are guided by the leadership of our Indigenous partners in this endeavor. They provide us with new opportunities to strengthen our collaboration with allies and partners in the region, and this, of course, includes Inuit, First Nations and Métis communities in Inuit, Nunavut, and in the North who have historically contributed to our Arctic security and sovereignty. That relationship is going to be absolutely essential, and as trusted partners ensuring our collective safety and security. Our government is going to, by necessity, invest billions of dollars into our Arctic, and we need this work to be guided by our foreign policy, because defense policy is an extension of foreign policy. And using diplomacy, as I've said, to shape the international environment and to advance Canada's national security interest is going to be one of the main focuses of our Arctic foreign policy. Together, with our North Strong and Free and the Arctic foreign policy, I believe together we will increase both our military and diplomatic presence in the region, further assert Canada's sovereignty, and it is a generational opportunity to build a stronger nation. The Arctic foreign policy complements our defense policy, and it provides us with the diplomatic tools that we will need to assert our sovereignty and to maintain peace, stability, and prosperity in the region. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of our partners and friends for their advice, their support, and sometimes their necessary criticism, which has always been constructive. I particularly want to acknowledge Indigenous communities and leadership who have shared their invaluable expertise and knowledge in the region. You're going to make it possible for the Canadian Armed Forces, working together with the Rangers, to do their important job of protecting our national interest. I also want to take this opportunity to thank members of the Canadian Armed Forces, and in particular, the Canadian Rangers. They work hard every day to safeguard our North and in every corner of our country and around the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Blair. I would like now to invite to the stage Minister Van Daal to provide his remarks.
Kwekwe, Houdlakut, Tansi, bonjour mes amis, and hello. I am very, very pleased to join all of you here this morning and my colleagues for the launch of this new Arctic foreign policy. Ministre Joly, merci à toi et ton équipe pour votre travail extraordinaire pour cette politique. The Arctic foreign policy was developed to promote a safe, strong, and thriving future for those who live in the North and in the Arctic. It is a result of extensive collaboration and consultation, and tough consultation, with First Nations, Inuit, Métis, modern treaty and self-government partners and organizations, as well as territorial and provincial governments. While the new policy will broaden Canada's international engagement, the work will also address northern domestic priorities that will be more important than ever with the Arctic foreign policy. Affordable housing in northern and Arctic communities is one urgent priority. In all of the consultations and the conversations I've had in my 5 years as Northern Affairs Minister, affordable housing is the #1 priority. We are working with Indigenous and territorial partners to reduce overcrowding and to reduce homelessness, to improve housing conditions all over the North. With distinctions-based investments from the federal government, Inuit treaty organizations have constructed over 600 new housing units and repaired over 450 existing units since 2016. While we are making progress in these areas, there is still much work to do, and you're going to hear about that later this morning. The North is also facing another significant challenge, which is climate change. With the Arctic warming 4 times faster than the global average, severe weather events, forest fires, coastal erosion shifts are impacting communities all over the North and the Arctic. In 2023, more than half of the population of the Northwest Territories had to be evacuated because of historic wildland fires. These devastating effects are often having tragic, traumatic consequences. Northern communities are leading the way by fighting climate change through climate monitoring, adaptive solutions, and the transition to clean energy. While we are supporting these efforts with programs such as climate change preparedness, which helps permafrost degradation, increase floods and wildland fires, and other environmental challenges. But there is more work to do. And we will work together to tackle these issues affecting northern communities. We are weaving together Indigenous knowledge and co-managing resources, leading to meaningful progress and contributing to self-determination. Based on a shared vision for the Arctic's future, the Arctic foreign policy will serve to advance the interests and the priorities of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis, modern treaty and self-government partners, territorial governments, and the Northerners who call the Arctic home. Kuyanamik, miigwech, marcy, and thank you.
Thank you, Minister Vandal. I would like to now invite to the stage President Obed to provide his remarks.
Nakomik. Udlakut, everyone. Good morning. Before I start, I would like to first recognize Elder David Sekwok for drumming this morning and providing some words of wisdom. Also, Minister Joly, thank you for inviting me to be a part of this, and thank you for your close collaboration and leadership through these many years that we have worked together on many different files. Your cabinet colleagues, Minister Vandal, Minister Blair, so wonderful to see you here this morning. Premiers, we usually see each other in more remote locations, but it's great to see you here in Ottawa. And of course, Inuit leadership, Inuit Circumpolar Council Canada President Lisa Kopakwaluk, Paul Lingout, Vice President for Nunavut Tungavik, Johannes Lamp, President for Nunatsiavut Government, and we also have Herb Nakamayuk, who's the Vice President of ICC Canada here This is just a part of our Inuit leadership and a part of, I guess, our self-determination and the way that we have mobilized in a democratic fashion to not only bring back self-determination and self-government to Inuit, but also to connect with our partners. And Canada is our partner, as are many international, whether it be nation states or other Indigenous peoples. And we are now living in a space where we can fully realize our self-determination within the nation state, but also move forward and work in a collaborative way that upholds our rights. Also, my senator colleagues here and also First Nations and Métis leadership really appreciate being able to be a part of this excellent work. Inuit Nunangat is what we call our homeland, and the term is meant to describe the sum total of the settlement areas of all of our modern treaties. There are 4 Inuit treaty organizations: Nunatsiavut Government, Makivik in Nunavik in northern Quebec, Nunavut Tungavik in Nunavut, and the Inuvialuit Regional Corporation in the Northwest Territories. This sum total is 40% of Canada's landmass, and 72% of Canada's coastline. It's important for Canadians to understand that we either own outright in fee simple that area, or we co-manage that entire space with the Government of Canada and with provinces and territories within. This gives Inuit an outsized role in the domestic undertaking of anything from decisions on wildlife, decisions on land use, decisions upon governance across this entire space. Unfortunately, we still have been in a space where Canada's foreign policy, the way in which Canada describes itself to the world, is not necessarily taking into consideration the Canadian reality. Really, Canada is learning to understand itself, and the comprehensive agreements that it has made with Indigenous peoples in order to share Canada, in order to understand the actual country that we live in. And when the Canadian government goes out into the diplomatic space in our international community, too often Indigenous peoples have been completely left behind or just not considered at all. This Arctic foreign policy helps change that. It's a sea change. It is a moment in time where we can all understand this country better and all understand how Indigenous peoples can work with Canada as allies, work within our democracies to be able to bring positions forward, not only on issues that are domestic, but also international, and also just change the narrative. I grew up in the shadow of the militarization of the Arctic. Most of us did. If you grew up in Kudjak, in Iqaluit, in Coral Harbor, in Rankin Inlet, in Cambridge Bay, in Inuvik, the infrastructure in those communities was built for the militarization of the Arctic, largely World War II and Cold War era. The decisions about not only those communities, but all the dew line sites, all of the infrastructure that exists across Inuit Nunangat was made independent of our democracies, was made without consideration of the impact upon us. As Minister Blair has said, a key consideration moving forward is the Inuit of the Arctic, and generally speaking, beyond Inuit Nunangat, for First Nations and Métis who also live in the Arctic and share a space. I think of Kluaniadamak and all of the conversations that we've had in the Yukon to understand the deep connections that we have as Northerners and as people who have a shared passion for Canada's Arctic and the North. It's exciting to have co-developed many sections of this Arctic policy with the Government of Canada. The working relationship we've had with Global Affairs is a precedent and is something that I hope that we can replicate in other major Government of Canada policies. We have used the Inuit Crown Partnership Committee to be able to do a lot of this work. And I want to thank all departments and all ministers who've been a part of our ICPC that have been able to create shared priorities and work plans that get us to outcomes like today. There's a lot of work to do with a changing climate, with new threats, with the sustainability of our communities, within the changing geopolitical climate of the Arctic. We look forward to working with Canada through our democratic processes, domestically through ITK and our treaty organizations, internationally through the Inuit Circumpolar Council and the Inuit Circumpolar Council Canada, and with all of our partners to ensure that we can make the most of what is to come. Nakumik, thank you again, Minister Joly, for your leadership.
McCormick, President Obed. I will now turn it over to Premier Simpson to provide some remarks.
The North is at the center of Canada's strategic future. It is essential that Canada has a strong international vision for the Arctic and the North, one that addresses the realities of today and prepares for the challenges of tomorrow. The challenges facing the Arctic are significant, but so are the opportunities. By working together at all levels of government, we can realize those opportunities and a shared vision for a resilient, thriving, and prosperous North. I'm honored to be here today to support the release of Canada's Arctic foreign policy, along with my colleagues from Nunavut and Yukon, as well as the many Indigenous leaders here in the room and online. It's good to see many familiar faces and friends here. I want to recognize and thank Minister Joly for her commitment to engagement and collaboration on this work. There were many visits to the territories and multiple rounds of engagement with Indigenous governments and territorial governments as the policy was developed. And the results of these extensive efforts are clear in the final documents, and you can hear them in the comments made by Minister Joly. The North and its people are at the heart of the new Arctic foreign policy, and the inclusion and leadership of Northern peoples will be essential to its implementation. Meaningful collaboration with Indigenous leaders strengthens governance, supports reconciliation, and ensures that policy is grounded in the knowledge, cultures, and lived experiences of those it's intended to serve. This collaborative approach is how I have committed to work as Premier, and it's encouraging to see it as a foundational element of the Arctic foreign policy as well. Safeguarding Arctic sovereignty and security goes hand in hand with advancing opportunities for Northerners. Strategic nation-building investments in the Northwest Territories, in housing infrastructure, climate resilience, critical minerals, the health and healing of Indigenous people, and strategic infrastructure projects will unlock the North's enormous potential and contribute significantly to the prosperity and national security of all Canadians. The future of the North is the future of Canada. The Northwest Territories will continue to be a strong partner in advancing Canada's Arctic leadership and building this future together. Thank you all. Masicho.
Thank you, Premier Simpson. I will now turn it over to Premier Pillai to provide some his remarks.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Ranj Pillai, Premier of the Yukon. So pleased to be here alongside my counterparts from the Northwest Territories and Nunavut this morning, along with Minister Joly, Minister Blair, Mr. Vandel. Thank you. As well, I just want to point out we've got a contingent here from the Yukon and MP Hanley, who's been here with us this morning, and Senator Duncan, but also our regional chief. And it really, that's symbolic of how we work together in the Yukon, and really it's emulated in this policy, and I very appreciate it, arm in arm, as we speak on behalf of Yukoners. I also want to recognize the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation. Without question, the North is experiencing new threats, challenges, and opportunities, some of which are global, like climate change and shifting geopolitical realities, and others that are local, such as the need to build housing, upgrade infrastructure, stabilize supply chains, and maintain traditional ways of life. Last year, our government established the Yukon Arctic Security Advisory Council, a panel of defense and security experts and Yukon First Nations leaders mandated to study future security risks to the territory and provide recommendations to address these threats. And then last month, we received their final report. I'm pleased with the recent announcements as well from the Canadian Armed Forces on the intent to establish a Canadian Naval Reserve presence in Whitehorse. And we spoke, Minister, about a year ago. It's almost a year to the day. And your vision was there. And we sat down with Minister Blair as well. And so I thank you for the work you've done and for the support that we've had. And for the Government of Canada's work with us again to create a new Arctic Security Centre of Excellence in the Yukon, which I want to be working on hand in hand with the other premiers. We're already starting to see our work, Canada's defence policy, and this new Arctic foreign policy deliver for Yukoners. The Yukon is absolutely committed to being a reliable contributor to Canadian security and sovereignty. Our government will continue to work with federal and provincial and territorial and Indigenous and international partners and to build a world where Northerners are safe, housed, healthy, and secure. I thank you again, Minister, for your leadership on this file. I thank you for your words as well, Nathan. I think you embody what's here and how we think about how we work together arm in arm as Yukoners and as Northerners. And again, appreciate the opportunity to come and speak with you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Premier Pillai. I would now invite to the stage Premier Akiaguk to provide his remarks.
Udlakun kuyanna me galo tabane khatike yun nakta inarigase sivudlupa me kuyanna me rumagivara tan inariyavun Mr. David Sekwa pigiarutia valum iqaigutime tunisekama kuyanna me rumagivara tan angayokka Obed Minister Joly asugudlatasimaman Minister Vandal Minister Blair amatako anu nakakasimayun amisun ukiutatome attutausimayun Koyaname Tavani Twinagunagata Tana Udlok Angayome Pinateluta. First off, good morning everyone. I am very honored to be able to be here for such a historic moment. First off, as I had just mentioned, I want to recognize our incredible elder, David Sekwa, for grounding us on such a historic moment, but also recognize Angayokak Obed for his incredible leadership with the Inuit leadership that is here, but the important work Minister Joly has done as well as Minister Vandal and Minister Blair. So it really is an honor to be here, to be able to launch Canada's new Arctic foreign policy. Nunavut very much welcomes this very important advancements in Canada's national interests and perspective within the circumpolar world. More than ever, the world needs a balanced and measured approach to diplomacy, and this has been the role Canada has often played on the international stage. Our territory, Nunavut, very much looks forward to continuing with the partnership we have with the federal government to advance our country's efforts regarding Arctic security and sovereignty. We recognize Nunavut really has a unique role in forging diplomatic relations in the North and throughout the circumpolar world. Our territory is ready to strengthen those diplomatic ties as part of Team Canada. For Nunavut, Arctic sovereignty and security hits very close to home. it is our lands and our waters we are talking about. Nunavut contributes to half of Canada's Arctic landmass and more than half of Canada's coastline. Nearly 40% of Canada is considered Arctic and northern, half of which is within Nunavut, including most of the Arctic archipelagos and the longest coastlines in Canada. With the melting ice of the Arctic waterways and the opening of the Northwest Passage, Nunavut will become an even more important gateway to the Arctic, but also to the world. I also want to note that at the heart of this very important work is the people. Canada's Arctic sovereignty arises from Inuit land use and occupancy and modern treaties like the Nunavut Agreement. It is our families who were sacrificed in the name of the Canadian flag. In the spirit of reconciliation and learning from our dark past, we welcome this collaborative approach to advancing Canada's diplomatic goals, which include public governments as well as Indigenous organizations. Most importantly, Nunavut believes that Canada's Arctic foreign policy objectives must be tackled through transformative and nation-building investments in infrastructure. And it is great to hear the acknowledgement of the infrastructure gap we have in the North and the emphasis that we must move quickly and to see investments come to the North. And it is time to strengthen Canada from coast to coast to coast and to unlock the incredible potential that we have in the Arctic. Fortifying the Canadian Arctic with multi-use infrastructure such as the deep-sea ports, the hydro fiber links, or the hydroelectric hubs will meet the local community needs, forge incredible opportunities that are there for economic development, but also address economic reconciliation. In the end, the success of this policy will be measured by the growth and the development of Canada's Arctic. Together, we could build the Canadian Arctic needed for all Canadians and the world. Oyennami.
McCormick, Premier Akiagok. I would now like to invite Chief Adamek to provide some remarks.
Gynach chish a hatuhan, yak esu tat, gynach chish algonquin kwan. Thank you so much for the opportunity to join you this morning. Particularly, I want to acknowledge, of course, the drum opening us up in a really good way. Gynach chish kayanamik. I want to also acknowledge all of the leaders and the rights holders who are in the room. This policy, as was acknowledged, can and must include the rights holders. And my reflections today really highlighting sort of what we've learned and where we are now and what the opportunities for the future, as Minister Blair had shared, could look like. We go back in time and think about the impacts in the Yukon, particularly with the Alaska Highway. And during a time where we needed to secure the North and the Arctic, the impacts were devastating to all those communities along the highway. And there's still impacts today with respect to the trauma that brought. On my community in Kluane First Nation, Burwash Landing, we weren't able to hunt at all on the mountain. In fact, it was all secured for the US military. And so those parts of our history, when we're talking about a new path forward, and I want to acknowledge the Premier and my colleague and friend, President Obed, for recognizing that in order to move forward, we do have to acknowledge some of those dark chapters. And I know, Minister, that you're committed to doing that. But in that work, it also requires a new approach, and want to acknowledge the federal government and all those who work to provide their insight, their knowledge and experiences to how to do things better. because certainly those impacts felt are still felt today in my grandmother's generation, of which I still have great aunties who are with us. I also think about the realities that while we do have international borders that divide us, especially as Tlingit people, I come from the Dachlawedi, the killer whale people. And some would say, how do you have killer whale people in the Yukon? You're not directly really connected to the southern part of that ocean. But in fact, it's been the trade relationships. That is the lineage in which the Dachlawedi come from, is the southeast of Alaska. And so there are so many stories of our people and the way in which we traded, the way in which you see our beadwork zone, the way in which we make our moccasins, that is traded and has been amongst our people. We have the Copper Jane as my daughter's middle name that connects us to Copper Alaska. So while we acknowledge and recognize our international boundaries and stand with you as a proud Tlingit, Southern Shoshone, Kluane woman who also identifies as a Canadian, we have to acknowledge that there are going to be hard conversations with respect to what does defense look like for Tlingit people, because Tlingit people are in Alaska and the Yukon. And so want to acknowledge, of course, with the Inuit Nunaga spreads far beyond international boundaries. So for those who might be unfamiliar, this work is very complex. It is not easy work. And so it does require us to be open and flexible and honest about the ways in which the history has impacted us, and to ensure that while having voices at the table is important, it also requires a rights-based approach. And so I look to all the leaders who are in the room now. This is the work of our communities. And for us to be supported in doing that work, in my view, and for the Yukon region, is most critical. I also think about some of the impacts. And certainly we look at salmon as an indicator species. And so the salmon in the Yukon, of course, coming in from, the north, in and through the rivers, there are communities that have only had 16 salmon, Klakshu particularly in Champagne-Ajac. So this work, while defense is important and economics are important, and of course the bases and the structures and asserting Arctic sovereignty is important, we are all connected. And we need to be looking at those indicator species, like salmon, to say, where are our people at in the north? And what do they need to be supported to feel that they are a part of this Arctic foreign policy? And so again, I acknowledge those who have been leading the charge with respect to having Indigenous people not only included in the fine print, but rather creating that space for us to be fully engaged and a part of those decisions. But it's also an opportunity for us to hold our federal partners to account to that. And so in the Yukon, certainly look forward to ways in which Yukon First Nations be included in that work, to our brothers and sisters in Dena'dai, how you choose and would like to be included in that work and represented. And of course, our brothers and sisters, the Inuit and Inuit Nunagat, and what that looks like for you. So with that, do want to say thank you so much, Ganach Chish. And my last reflection will be, there's a story, while it's, these policies bring us together and we talk about the future and sustainability and energy and trade, it is actually our stories that which connect us. And from the Dachlawedi clan, there was the clan, and at one point in time, we had moved from the southeast coast back into the Yukon. And we were going back to the southeast after a great flood. And all of this, of course, is reaffirmed by a number of different geological studies with respect to water in the land. But Awastay and Yekdushe, they were two matriarchs of the Dachlawedi. And so they came to this huge glacier. And the clan was deliberating, what are we going to do, right? Like, we've got our young people, we've got our knowledge keepers, we have our leaders. How do we get past this huge glacier to get back home to the rest of our clan? And it was Awastay and Yekdushe who said, the matriarch said, I see an opening there and we're just going to go. And so there's a song that goes with this story, but certainly it has always been Indigenous, particularly Indigenous matriarchs, and I see some of them right at the front who are looking at me and nodding, which I appreciate. But it has always been Indigenous people that have had the tools, because of our stories and our songs and our relationship to land. We have always had to navigate defense. We have always had to navigate incredibly hard issues. And so it is so integral that we are leading this work as a true partner. So thank you so much. I also acknowledge that is a Duckloeddie clan story, so shared only by the Duckloeddie people. But thank you so much for the opportunity to join you and for remembering those important elements in this work moving forward. Ganesh Chish.
Shonithun, Chief Adamek, and warm thanks again to all of our speakers and distinguished guests who joined us today. Nous sommes impatients de poursuivre notre collaboration et d'approfondir notre coopération avec vous pour la mise en œuvre de la politique étrangère du Canada pour l'Arctique. L'événement touche maintenant à sa fin. The event has come to a close. I would like to request from Global Affairs colleagues to remain seated for a couple of minutes while invited guests and dignitaries make their way to the reception. Dear guests, designated staff just outside this room will facilitate you making your way through the elevators and to the 9th floor. I will then ask everyone to please exit the room as ministers and leaders have a press conference with media starting in just a few minutes. Je veux vous remercier encore sincèrement. Thank you very much.